From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome to All Things with Kim Strassel. I am here this week with Corey DeAngelis, a man who is at the very tip of the spear of the school choice movement. He's a senior fellow at the American Federation for Children. He has a long list of think tanks behind his name and is also an author. Welcome, Corey DeAngelis. You call yourself a school choice evangelist, but if I am right, as I follow you on social media, you have a new reason to be interested in education because you are a new father. Am I right?
That's right, Kim. I'm joined the parent revolution on the front lines. So it's a great feeling. I never knew I could love like this. Well,
congratulations. And yes, the love shows on your pictures on social media. It's a real joy to watch. So let me start with this. When I go out and I talk around the country and people talk to me about how frustrated they are by politics, how concerned they are for the future, my response is always, yes, that's one half of the story, the half you see when you look at Washington, D.C. But when you look out at the states, the place where we free market conservatives, by the way, are supposed to care the most, the story is completely opposite. It is amazing and it's positive, and the main reason is school choice. Tell us about some of the things that have revolutionized over the past couple of years.
That's right. The laboratories of democracy at the state level are working as the founders intended, at least when it comes to education freedom. I got to tell you, Kim, we're winning so much, I'm almost getting tired of winning. Just kidding. We haven't gotten to the blue states yet. But 12 Republican-led states have gone all in on school choice in the past 3 years. That's more movement on school choice in the past 3 years than in the preceding 3 decades. Now in these states, most recently Louisiana, every single family, regardless of income, background, zip code, can now take their children's taxpayer-funded education dollars to the education provider of their choosing. That could be a public school. You know, if you like your public school, you can keep your public school, but for real this time, unlike with your doctor. But if not, you can take that money to a private school, charter school, or a home-based education option. So it's been a lot of momentum in a very short amount of time. And guess what? It's the teachers union's own fault. They overplayed their hand. They fought to keep the schools closed as long as possible. And now parents, they're fed up. The jig is up. They're pushing for school choice. They had their mics cut off at the school board meeting when they tried to push back there. And that they figured that the best form of accountability is being able to vote with your feet, because that provides the school boards an incentive to do a better job, to treat the parents as customers, as a partner in the relationship, as opposed to an enemy. So it is a lot of positive news on the school choice front, and we're not done yet. My home state of Texas should get it done in 2025 as well.
This is the amazing thing to me, just the speed of which this has happened, because I am old enough. I remember getting into this fight, and we were fighting essentially a rearguard action simply to justify a few charter schools in inner city failing environments. And that has entirely changed. And you just touched on this a little bit, but part of it was the unions and COVID lockdowns. Is that really all it is? Has something else changed? Why is this happening now?
Yeah, for far too long in K-12 education, the only special interest represented the employees, the adults in the system. But now, thankfully, the kids have a union of their own. They're called parents. They're holding politicians accountable, and especially in Republican primaries. In my home state of Texas, there were actually 21 Republicans who voted against their party platform issue of school choice last year in the House. Well, guess what? Now, after Super Tuesday and the runoffs, 14 of them are gone. That basically never happens. Incumbents usually win re-election about 95% of the time. And in Texas, the vast majority of the incumbents who voted against school choice in the House lost their seats. And so this is where ballot box accountability is really important, and it's because school choice is supported among voters. And although the schools are open, the problems are still there. Yes, the teachers unions fought to keep the schools closed throughout 2020, 2021, in some places in 2022, like Chicago, where they were actually tweeting that it was racist to reopen schools. I mean, it was just totally ridiculous. So much hypocrisy. They had board members vacationing in Puerto Rico while railing against going back to work. But now the families especially conservatives are seeing that there's more indoctrination than education going on in too many schools, and we're not getting our money's worth. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, we now spend nearly $20,000 per student per year in the government-run school system, and we've increased funding per student by about 160% after adjusting for inflation since 1970. Have the outcomes gotten 160% better? No. In some places, they've gotten worse. And families don't want to send their kids to schools where they feel like they're being indoctrinated for 13 years of their lives, for 7 hours a day. And so that's been another argument for school choice that has been uncovered or revealed over the past few years. Vodi Bakum said it best. We cannot continue to send our children to Caesar for their education and be surprised when they come home as Romans. Well, guess what? Parents aren't surprised anymore. They've woken up.
I want to dig into this question you just brought up about Republican opposition to this. And this is really striking to me. Tell me if I'm wrong, and maybe you can explain this to listeners a little bit more who might be confused by this, because they think of conservatives, Republicans, as the party of school choice. And yet what we have seen in different states, whether it be Iowa, we've seen some of it in Florida, Texas, as your home state, as you note, you see Republicans from rural areas in particular, and they look at the way funding is set up across the state and they say, well, and they have a little bit more local control sometimes in their areas. So they say, well, things are good now. And if we have universal school choice, it's potentially going to actually take away money from our district. This has been their argument. Tell us why that's wrong and what kind of lesson voters are sending those rural Republicans.
Yeah, you can't tell me rural Republican voters don't support school choice after the primaries in Texas that I just mentioned. And all across the country, we targeted 27 lawmakers who oppose school choice this past year. And now 18 of them are gone. That translates to a 67% win rate against incumbents, a lot of them rural Republicans who voted against their own party platform. But look, the argument that they'll make is they'll say, look, it's really just a way for them to try to have their cake and eat it too. These are a lot of the same guys who are already endorsed by the teachers union in Texas. For example, the 21 no votes, 18 of them were previously endorsed by the state affiliate of the National Education Association, but they try to have their cake and eat it too. They say, on the one hand, my constituents can't use this. They'll say, quote, the public school is the only option. But then in the next breath, with a straight face, they'll try to tell you that school choice will defund their fantastic rural public school. Well, hold on a second. One, if the public school is so fantastic, they should have nothing to worry about. And then two, more importantly, if it's true that nobody can leave because the public school is the only option, well, then why are you making the second argument that it's going to defund your schools? The public schools are funded based on enrollment. If no one's going to leave, they're going to keep the same money that they had before. The reality is even rural states have school choice. In fact, according to the Census Bureau, the 9 most rural states in the country already have some form of private school choice. That includes West Virginia, the state that was the first to go all in on school choice back in 2021. West Virginia is much more rural on many metrics than Texas. And you can also look at states like Maine and Vermont, some of the most rural states in the country. They have the oldest voucher programs in the country. In fact, they started in the late 1800s, over 150 years ago, specifically designed for parents with children in areas that were so rural, they didn't have public schools. They figured out over 150 years ago that not having a lot of choice was an argument to expand opportunities, not to restrict them. They gave vouchers to families to take to other public schools in other districts, or even to private religious or non-religious private schools. So this is an excuse. It's the same Democrat talking point, just repackaged in another way. And look, if your rural public schools are great, they're going to do a good job. They shouldn't have anything to worry about.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more on the school choice fight with Corey DeAngelis. I am back with Corey DeAngelis, a school choice evangelist. You are talking about Republican primaries, and since we are chatting about the political side of this, let me just ask this question, though, because I think it's something else worth teasing out, is This is not necessarily a sentiment, though, that is confined to Republican voters. I remember reading a really great piece making the argument that when Ron DeSantis made his first run for governor, the margin of difference, the voters that put him over the top in a very close election, were Black mothers who liked the fact that he was in support of more school choice. So this isn't a winner just among Republican voters, right? This is something you are seeing play out across coalitions of voters as an issue.
That's right. In fact, that was a Wall Street Journal op-ed by the name of School Choice Moms Tip the Governor's Race in Florida back in 2018. So basically, Republicans have a huge opportunity here. This should signal to Trump that he should lean into parental rights as a political winner going into November, and all Republicans, in fact, because you have supermajority support among Republicans, Democrats, and independents for school choice, and they can make inroads with groups that historically might not have voted for them. And so with DeSantis in 2018, the Black moms, they turned school choice into a single issue priority. Look, his opponent, Andrew Gillum, called to get rid of the scholarship program that was benefiting over 100,000 families at the time, disproportionately non-white families, low-income families, and those families who might have disagreed with DeSantis on everything else, they wanted their kids to get a better education, a better opportunity. We saw this play out again in 2021 with Mr. Terry. I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach. McAuliffe, the former Democrat governor of Virginia, in a state that went 10 points to Biden the year before, lost to Glenn Youngkin, a Republican, on the issue of education by 6 points with those voters who prioritized education. And that basically never happens for Republicans. They're typically behind on education, and they have been for decades in double-digit numbers. And so Glenn Youngkin laid out a blueprint for political success for Republicans, but also if the Democrats are smart and if they band together and support families as opposed to the teachers' unions, the teachers' unions won't be able to control them anymore. And we're starting to see some of that happen at the state level. In Louisiana, the most recent state to go universal on school choice, 20% of their House Democrats voted to go all in on school choice this year. And so that's not where I'd like the numbers to be. It's not 100%, but it's much better than 0%. And it reminds me of something that Milton Friedman said long ago. He had a lot of good quotes, but one of his best was that the way that you change things is not by getting the right people into office. That obviously helps if they vote for the right things, but the way that you really change things is by creating a climate of opinion where it becomes politically profitable for the wrong people to do the right thing. And so I think we're getting to that point on school choice where both parties are starting to realize we need to listen to the kids union, not just the teachers union, because parents care about their kids more than anybody else. And they also have more power in numbers. They outnumber the employees in the system for now.
What's next on the state agenda? In the Wall Street Journal editorial page, we had a good editorial the other day about Kentucky, which is an outlier among its neighbors that do have school choice. Its constitution is a bit of an obstacle to school reform. They have a ballot referendum coming up this fall. Where else are you looking? You mentioned Texas. Where are the next battlefields?
Yeah, first in Kentucky, I disagree with their Supreme Court's ruling. They basically have a stipulation in their constitution that says you have to have a public school system. School choice doesn't change that. In fact, there are over 30 states with school choice right now that have similar constitutions. So I think that was more of a judicial activism problem than a constitution problem. And nonetheless, it is on the ballot. It's directly to the voters to amend the constitution to make clear that school choice is permissible in Kentucky. And so we'll see how that works out. I will say I did have a piece in the Wall Street Journal with Dean McGee. We recently laid out how school districts are engaging in illegal electioneering in Kentucky. It's illegal to use public resources to advocate for or against a ballot measure. And you have a school district, Pulaski County, that did so, posted a Facebook post saying to vote against the amendment for school choice. And they also had it on a physical billboard outside their district offices.
Egregious.
I know, insane. So they're trying to put their thumb on the scales against school choice in Kentucky, but I think voters, they still understand that school choice is a good thing. We'll see what happens in November. Other states, I think all eyes on Texas, where I live. That'll be the crown jewel of school choice victories. It's the biggest state that would have universal school choice, over 5 million children in the public school system. That would be a huge win. I think it's going to happen. Speaker Dade Phelan, who was previously endorsed by the teachers union back in 2022, he, for the first time this year, a couple weeks ago, put out policy priorities, including for the first time, private school choice. So that's a big win, a step in the right direction. He narrowly won his reelection after getting challenged by conservative groups. And so maybe sometimes you don't have to win against an incumbent. You just have to get close enough to send a message. Regardless of the reason for Dade Phelan, the Speaker of the Texas House, supporting school choice in a public way, it doesn't matter. It's good news for families in the state of Texas. Tennessee is a state to watch as well. I was hearing that they had the votes in both chambers. They obviously did in the Senate. They had a majority of the Senate co-sponsoring the bill last year. It did not get through the committee process to make it to a floor vote in the House. Tennessee primaries went well for school choice supporters, and leadership is fully on board with universal school choice. So that's another state to watch. And the long story short, Kim, is the states to watch are red states for the time being. Hopefully more Democrats start to come along on the issue. Maybe some of those blue states turn into red states in the near future, but it's a lot more likely that the Republican-led states are going to continue this momentum. So you can look at Wyoming. Their primaries went really well. You can look at any other red state that hasn't done it already. We're starting to run out of red states. Again, we're winning a lot on the issue.
That's good news. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, more with Corey DeAngelis.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome back. I am Kim Strassel, here this week with Corey DeAngelis of the School Choice Movement. I want to ask you a question about policy. You've mentioned a lot, and it's the word on everyone's tongues, universal school choice. And we know the description of that, being able to choose whatever form of education you would like. But obviously within each state, there are different ways that states have gone about doing this. Sometimes there's scholarships. People have talked about education savings accounts. Obviously, there are mixes of charter schools, homeschooling, etc. If you're a parent out there right now and your state is thinking about school choice or you want to see more options, what should you be pushing your legislators to do? What are you seeing as the model of school choice funding, as it were, to make this happen? What works best?
I would say take any win, take any incremental victory as a step in the right direction. But I will say I would look towards Arizona. They have universal school choice, meaning everybody's eligible. They're not picking winners and losers based on background characteristics. So everyone can take their kids' money to the education provider that works best for them. And they have it in the form of an education savings account, which maximizes the flexibility on the part of the parent. It's not just a voucher or a scholarship where you can only use it for private school tuition and fees. That is a huge win, but it limits the access that parents have to other forms of education, including homeschooling, micro schools. A lot of people were talking about pandemic pods during the COVID era where 5 to 10 children were getting together in a household. Well, with an ESA, you can use that funding to pay a private tutor or guide or teacher in a micro school that you could set up kind of like a homeschool co-op in a household. And so that has been very successful in Arizona. In fact, they have a micro school provider called Prenda Micro Schools. They were growing so much during the COVID era, and families were already using ESA funding to attend Prenda Micro Schools, that the teachers union, the largest one, the NEA, the National Education Association, they actually put an opposition research sheet together against Prenda Micro Schools. And in fact, the editorial board at the Wall Street Journal ran a piece on this when they got a hold of that opposition research file. And the headline was "The Teachers Union's Tiny Little Enemy." And so this is a way to shake up the status quo like we've never seen before. And in rural areas, like you talked about earlier, supply is going to meet demand, but that's more likely to happen if you have lower cost options that are available to pop up. And so when you have ESAs, since you don't have to build a brick and mortar private school in order to meet demand, you're more likely to have supply respond to that demand in rural areas. And this has happened in Florida. In Florida, data from Step Up for Students found that over the past decade or so, as they've expanded school choice, the number of private education providers in their most rural counties has basically doubled as school choice has expanded. So when you build it, they will come. You give the money to the families. Those options will become available. I would say ESAs are the best way to do that.
And what would you say to those voters who hear from the unions, they hear from public school teachers who say, private school options, alternatives to public schools, and all this money that's flowing into them because of these changes, they show no better outcomes in educational learning than public schools. Now, I don't agree with that, but that's their argument.
I mean, you can't get any worse than the government-run failure factories that we call public schools. You have Baltimore. They have 40% of their high schools have 0% math proficiency rates. It's time to give that money to the parents so they can find better opportunities. That might be measured by academics, but it also might be measured based on their values. Families want to send their kids to schools that align with their values and that do not tell them to hate their country, do not divide them based on immutable characteristics, do not focus on gender ideology. And parents should be able to make that choice. I'm not saying what the curriculum ought to be. My argument is that this should be the decision of the parents. We shouldn't have the teachers unions making that decision on how to control the minds of other people's children. So this is a freedom issue, not really about test scores. But I will say we have 29 studies on this topic. 26 of them are positive that when you expand school choice, the outcomes improve in the public schools. It's a rising tide that lifts all boats. Competition works in K through 12 education just like everywhere else. And public schools do up their games in response to competition. And so this is a win-win solution. It's good for families who use the programs. Obviously, no one's really arguing about that. It also benefits the kids who remain in the public school system. And I would say it also benefits the teachers too. If you look at the teacher salaries over time, although we throw more money at the problem each and every year, teacher salaries have only increased by about 5% since 1970, while we've increased funding by 160%. The teachers aren't seeing the benefit of the status quo because their employer, the district, is a monopoly that has no incentive to spend additional dollars wisely. And they have no incentive to cater to their employees either because they also operate like a monopsony. And so if you have school choice, that provides the schools a stronger incentive to focus more on putting more money into the classroom. We spend about $20,000 per kid per year in America in the government-run schools, and we have about, let's say, 30 kids per classroom. That's $600,000. Where's all the money going? It's not going to the teachers. It's going towards administrative bloat, staffing surges, people like Randy Weingarten who make over $500,000 a year. So school choice, competition benefits all, even the teachers.
We've been talking about what's been going on at the states, but as we get to the end here, let's broaden it out to the federal level. What role, if any, does the Department of Education play in this fight out there? And what would it mean on the basis of that if Democrats were to win or Republicans were to win the election this fall?
Well, I would say, first of all, we shouldn't have a federal Department of Education. The word education is not in the U.S. Constitution. It's a violation of the 10th Amendment. And it was really created in 1979 as a payoff to the teachers unions by Jimmy Carter. And so they've spent over $1 trillion since the inception of the Department of Education. Outcomes haven't gotten any better. We should give that money back to the states and let them have more local control. Let them decide how to spend that money wisely. And I think they'll do a better job. You can still have state level departments of education without having it at the federal level. Trump has called to get rid of the federal Department of Education as well. He also said he put a libertarian in the cabinet. If he really wants to check both of those boxes, he could hire me. I'll fire myself on the first day. If we're not going to go that far, and there is a bill by Thomas Massie to get rid of the department altogether, it doesn't have a lot of co-sponsors. I think a more likely scenario is that you use the existing structure to expand school choice if you're not going to get rid of it entirely. And there's a bill called the Educational Choice for Children Act in Congress right now. In fact, it has 150 153 co-sponsors in the U.S. House, including Speaker Mike Johnson, that would create a federal tax benefit for school choice expenses. So that would be a way to supercharge school choice that's already happening in red states, while expanding school choice to families in blue states that have legislatures that are controlled by the teachers unions. So I would see that as a step in the right direction, even though I am in favor personally of getting rid of the Department of Education altogether. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, I mean, we've seen how education has worked in Minnesota. Since he became governor, spending has gone up by 21%, but outcomes have gotten worse. His state has gone from 6th in education to 19th in education now. Things have gotten worse as spending has gone up. Both of them are in bed with the teachers union. You saw Randy Weingarten and Becky Pringle speaking at the DNC recently, and Kamala Harris spoke at the AFT convention, Randy Weingarten's union's convention recently, saying that Randy Weingarten, the school closer, was her friend and advisor to herself and the president. I think that should be disqualifying. Randy Weingarten has done the most to fight to keep the schools closed as long as possible starting in 2020. They held children's education hostage to secure billions of dollars in ransom payments from taxpayers, and they care more about the needs of union bosses like Randy than the kids. So Trump is on the side of parents. He thinks that parents should be the primary decision makers for their own kids. That's why he supports school choice and the money following the child. And that's the big difference between the two. Kamala and Tim just see one solution, which doesn't fix anything. It's a definition of insanity, where they throw more money at the problem, expecting different results. Nothing's going to change that way until you change the incentives in the system to spend that money wisely.
All incredible points. I would add to this that Republicans could be doing a better job of making this an issue on the ballot for this fall, because it is something that motivates so many parents. Corey DeAngelis, thank you for all the work you are doing out there and for this good news podcast. It's not always I get to have a good news podcast, so very thankful. And I will be among those pushing for your appointment to the Department of Education head.
All right.
Okay. Thank you again.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you to our listeners. We are here every week. If you enjoy this show, please hit the subscribe button, and you can write to us at pwpodcast@wsj.com.